Much is said of the Wright brothers. Wilbur, 1867 to 1912, and Orville, 1871 to 1948, and their first controlled, sustained flight of a powered, heavier-than-air aircraft with the Wright Flyer on December 17, 1903, 4 miles south of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, as well as their invention in 1904 and 5 of the first practical fixed-wing aircraft, the Wright Flyer 3. Although they were not the first to build experimental aircraft, the Wright brothers were the first to invent the three-axis aircraft control system that made fixed-wing, powered flight possible. Their first U.S. patent, U.S. 821393A of May 22, 1906, did not claim to be the first ever invention of a flying machine, but described a three-axis system, pitch, roll, and yaw, of aerodynamic control that manipulated a flying machine's surfaces. Until May 6, 1937, the airplane flying machine was not the main mode of sky travel, and the inventions of the Wright brothers were not as important as they are today. The date May 6, 1937, was that of the so-called Hindenburg disaster, when the LZ-129 Hindenburg, a large German commercial passenger-carrying rigid airship designed and built by the Zeppelin Company and kept aloft by hydrogen gas and engines running off diesel fuel, exploded and burst into flames, crashing to the ground at 7:25 p.m. local time at Naval Air Station Lakehurst in Manchester Township, New Jersey, United States, killing 36 people, 13 passengers, 22 crewmen, and 1 worker on the ground. The wreck of the Hindenburg was not the worst of the great airship disasters, others having included the British R-38 in 1921, 44 dead, the U.S. airship Roma in 1922, 34 dead, the French Demeaux in 1923, 52 dead, the British R-101 in 1930, 48 dead, and the U.S. Akron in 1933, 73 dead. But it was the last, given it was recorded in newsreel coverage, photographs, and Herbert Morrison's instantly famous "Oh, the Humanity" radio eyewitness reports from the landing field. Prior to the Hindenburg disaster, the main mode of air travel was the dirigible balloon, a rigid structure blimp or aerostat, a lighter-than-air aircraft that gains its lift through the use of a buoyant gas. The first theory for such a vessel was the 1670 aerial ship designed by Italian Jesuit priest Francesco Lana de Terzi, 1631 to 1687, called the Father of Aeronautics. Considered the earliest vacuum airship or vacuum balloon, his is a hypothetical balloon airship that uses evacuation of oxygen in its tanks, copper spheres, rather than filling them with a lighter-than-air gas such as hydrogen or helium. The first person to use a hand-powered propeller to move a passenger balloon was Jean-Pierre Blanchard, 1753 to 1809, and in 1785 he crossed the English Channel in a balloon equipped with flapping wings for propulsion and a bird-like tail for steering. In 1852, Henry Giffard, 1825 to 1882, became the first person to make an engine-powered flight when he flew 27 kilometers, 17 miles, in a steam-powered airship. On June 1st, 1863, Solomon Andrews, 1806 to 1872, flew his Arion design, an unpowered, controllable dirigible, in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. The Arion had three 80-foot-long cigar-shaped balloons with a rudder and gondola, and its buoyancy was controlled by jettisoning sand ballast or releasing hydrogen lift gas. Dr. Andrews wrote Abraham Lincoln later that summer offering the Arion for use in the American Civil War, during which Andrews served for a time as a volunteer surgeon in the Union Army. After much discussion, he arranged a demonstration early in 1864 before the Smithsonian Institution. However, he was informed nearly a year later that the government had little interest in his invention, and by that time the war was nearly over. Undeterred, Andrews organized the Aerial Navigation Company to build commercial airships and establish a regular line between New York and Philadelphia. The Arion II had one lemon-shaped balloon, sharply pointed at the ends. It controlled buoyancy with a system of lines and pulleys that compressed the gas or allowed it to expand. It flew over New York City on May 25th and June 5th, 1866. The second trip, carrying a passenger assistant, a news reporter had to be left out at the last minute because of weight problems, ended at Oyster Bay, Long Island. By this point, a race toward the era of great airships had begun. The first fully controllable free flight was made in 1884 by Charles Renard, 1847 to 1905, and Arthur Constantin Krebs, 1850 to 1935, in the French Army airship La France. The 170-foot, 52-meter long, 66,000 cubic feet, 1,900 metric cube, airship La France covered 8 kilometers, or 5 miles, in 23 minutes with the aid of an 8.5 HP, 6.3 kilowatt electric motor, and a 435 kilogram, or 959 pound battery. La France made 7 flights in 1884 and 1885 and returned 5 times of these 7 in a round trip back to its starting point. In 1886, inspired by this feat, French futurist author Jules Verne, 1828 to 1905, penned the work Robur the Conqueror, also called The Clipper of the Clouds, ostensibly chronicling the debate between lighter-than-air dirigibles and heavier-than-air crafts like airplanes and, in this story's case, helicopters. The story was cautionary against dirigibles, pointing out their maximum pressure height above which their gas bags rupture, and in favor instead of a battery-powered multi-rotor gyrodyne design, essentially a helicopter with multiple vertical air screws to provide lift and two horizontal air screws in a push-pull configuration to drive the vessel forward. Further improvements to dirigible designs were made in 1888 with the Campbell airship, designed by Professor Peter C. Campbell, submitted to aeronautic engineer Carl Edgar Myers for examination before being built by the Novelty Airship Company, only to be lost at sea in 1889 while flown by Professor Hogan during an exhibition flight. And beginning in 1888, the three airships powered by a Daimler Motoren Gesellschaft-built petrol engine, the last of which caught fire in flight and killed both occupants in 1897, built by Friedrich Wolfert. In 1897, an airship with an aluminum envelope was built by the Hungarian-Croatian engineer David Schwartz, 1850 to 1897, and made its first flight at Tempelhof Field in Berlin after Schwartz had died. From 1897 to 99, Konstantin Danilewski, a medical doctor and inventor from Kharkiv, now Ukraine, then Russian Empire, built 4 muscle-powered airships of gas volume 150 to 180 cubic meters, and conducted an experimental flight program launching around 200 ascents at 2 locations without significant incident. On November 18, 1896, the Sacramento Bee and San Francisco Call newspapers reported the first California mystery airship sighting. Witnesses reported a bright light moving slowly over the capital city of Sacramento on the evening of November 17th at an estimated elevation of 1,000 feet. On November 19th, 1896, the Stockton, California newspaper, the Daily Mail, reported that a Colonel H.G. Shaw had found what he believed to have been a landed alien ship. Shaw described the craft as having a metallic surface, completely featureless apart from a rudder and pointed ends. He estimated a diameter of 25 feet and said the vessel was around 150 feet in total length. 3 slender, 7-foot tall, 2.1 meter, apparent extraterrestrials were said to approach from the craft, while, quote, emitting a strange warbling noise, end quote. The beings reportedly examined Shaw's buggy and then attempted to physically remove him from it to drag him to their ship. When they could not overcome him, the beings returned to their ship and sped off into the sky. Shaw believed the beings were Martians sent to kidnap an Earthling for unknowable but potentially nefarious purposes. This is apparently the first published account of explicitly so-called extraterrestrial beings attempting to abduct humans into their spacecraft. On November 21st, 1896, the mystery light reappeared over Sacramento and was also reportedly seen over several other cities that same evening, including San Francisco, Oakland, Folsom, Sebastopol, Modesto, Stockton, Turlock, Manteca, Crow's Landing, Ceres, Woodland, and others, and was said to have been viewed by at least several hundred witnesses. Whether these early UFO sightings are of man-made or alien technology, and whether these early reports were the result of tabloid gossip and rumor reporting, so-called yellow journalism, or possibly a form of mass hysteria, remain unresolved mysteries from this era to the day of this writing. The Battle of Los Angeles, also known as the Great Los Angeles Air Raid, occurred less than 3 months after the United States entered World War II in response to the Japanese Imperial Navy's attack on Pearl Harbor, and 1 day after the bombardment of Elwood near Santa Barbara, California, by a Japanese submarine on February 23, 1942. On February 24th, Naval Intelligence issued a warning that an attack could be expected within the next 10 hours. That evening, a large number of flares and blinking lights were reported from the vicinity of defense plants. An alert was called at 7:18 p.m. and was lifted at 10:23 p.m. Soon, however, radars picked up an unidentified target 120 miles west of Los Angeles. Anti-aircraft batteries were alerted at 2:15 a.m. and were put on green alert, ready to fire a few minutes later. Radars tracked the approaching target to within a few miles off the coast, and at 2:21 a.m., the regional controller ordered a blackout. Air raid sirens sounded at 2:25 a.m. throughout Los Angeles County. A total blackout was ordered, and thousands of air raid wardens were summoned to their positions. At 3:06 a.m., a balloon carrying a red flare was seen over Santa Monica, and 4 batteries of anti-aircraft artillery opened fire, whereupon, quote, the air over Los Angeles erupted like a volcano, end quote. At 3:16 a.m., the 37th Coast Artillery Brigade began firing 50 caliber machine guns and 12.8-pound anti-aircraft shells into the air at reported aircraft. Over 1,400 shells would eventually be fired. Several buildings and vehicles were damaged by shell fragments, and 5 civilians died as an indirect result of the anti-aircraft fire. 3 killed in car accidents in the ensuing chaos, and 2 of heart attacks attributed to the stress of the hour-long action. The first UFO sightings of the modern era occurred in November 1944, when pilots flying over Western Europe by night reported seeing fast-moving, round, glowing objects following their aircraft. The objects were variously described as fiery and glowing red, white, or orange. Some pilots described them as resembling Christmas tree lights and reported that they seemed to toy with the aircraft, making wild turns before simply vanishing. Pilots and aircrew reported that the objects flew formation with their aircraft and behaved as if they were under intelligent control, but never displayed hostile behavior. However, they could not be outmaneuvered or shot down. The phenomenon was so widespread that the lights earned a name. In the European theater of operations, they were often called Kraut fireballs, but for the most part, they were called Foo Fighters. The military took the sightings seriously, suspecting that the mysterious sightings might be secret German weapons. But further investigation revealed that German and Japanese pilots had reported similar sightings. The balls of fire phenomenon reported from the Pacific Theater of Operations differed somewhat from the Foo Fighters reported from Europe. The ball of fire reported there resembled a large burning sphere which just hung in the sky, though it was reported to sometimes follow aircraft. On one occasion, one of the gunners of a B-29 aircraft hit one with gunfire, causing it to break up into several large pieces that fell on buildings below and set them on fire. Project Sign was an official U.S. government study of unidentified flying objects, UFOs, undertaken by the United States Air Force and active for most of 1948. Project Sign's final report, called The Estimate of the Situation, and published in early 1949, stated that while some UFOs appeared to represent actual aircraft, there was not enough data to determine their origin. Project Grudge was the short-lived follow-up project by the U.S. Air Force to investigate UFOs. The project formally ended in December 1949, but continued in a minimal capacity until late 1951. Project Blue Book began in 1952, and a termination order was given for the study in December 1969, with all activity under its auspices officially ceasing in January 1970. Blue Book had two goals: to determine if UFOs were a threat to national security, and to scientifically analyze UFO-related data. By the time Project Blue Book ended, it had collected 12,618 UFO reports and concluded that most of them were misidentifications of natural phenomena, clouds, stars, etc., or conventional aircraft. According to the National Reconnaissance Office, a number of the reports could be explained by flights of the formerly secret reconnaissance planes U-2 and A-12. A small percentage of UFO reports remain classified as unexplained. On September 19, 1961, around 10:30 p.m., Barney Hill, 1922 to 1969, and his wife Betty Eunice Hill, formerly Betty Barrett, 1919 to 2004, were driving their 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air along U.S. Route 3, just south of Lancaster, back to their home in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, after a vacation in Niagara Falls and Montreal. On September 21st, Betty telephoned Peace Air Force Base to report the couple had encountered a UFO. On September 22nd, Major Paul W. Henderson telephoned the Hills for a more detailed interview. Henderson's Report 100-1-61 Air Intelligence Information Record, dated September 26th, was forwarded to Project Blue Book, with the cause for the sighting ultimately being listed as, quote, insufficient data, end quote. Innocuously overlooked by Blue Book as it was, this event became the first widely publicized report of an alien abduction in the United States.